Hey, seventh graders. I wanted to go through this little mini lesson here about solving two-step equations with rational numbers, just to remind us about the different rules that we have for solving equations with rational numbers. If we remember, a rational number is any whole number, positive or negative. Remember, rational numbers were any number positive or negative. And we had a few rules with what we could do when we were adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing them. So I just want to help us out here. So equations with rational numbers, I want you to follow along as I go through this little handout here. Equations with rational numbers can be solved just like any equation is the word they're looking for. But you must follow the rules for the word they're looking for here is integer operation. You must follow the rules for integer operation. What is that? What is integer operation? Those fancy rules that I gave you at the beginning of the year when we were talking about multiplying and dividing, adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. So let's just get right into it, huh? Let's start with adding. Let's start with adding our integers. If the two values have the same sign, then you add and use the same sign. Makes sense. If they both have the same sign, you simply add them together and use the sign. So if you have a positive plus a positive, you know your answer is going to be positive. If you have a negative and a negative, you know your answer is going to be negative. So if you have a positive 6 and a positive 5, you know your answer is positive 11. If you have a negative 6 and a negative 5, you know your answer is going to be negative 11. You're just going to add them and use the same sign if, of course, only if they have the same sign. Now, if your signs are different, that's when you subtract and you take the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. Remember, we spent so much time talking about this, how when you're adding and they have different signs, you need to take the absolute value of each one, and the one that has the bigger absolute value is the sign your answer is going to be, and then you simply subtract. So if you have, for this example, 6 and 5, negative 5, a 6 plus a negative 5, you know that 6 has a greater absolute value. So you would do 6 minus 5 and know that your answer is positive, it's 1. But for this example, you have negative 6 plus a positive 5, a negative 6 plus a positive 5, and your answer is negative because negative 6, the absolute value of negative 6 is 6, the absolute value of positive 5 is 5. Which one's bigger? 6 is. So your answer is going to be negative because negative 6 has a bigger absolute value. So then you do 6 minus 5 and you get a negative 1. Negative 1. You need to rewrite for subtracting the integers. You rewrite the problems to add the opposite. Then you follow the rules for adding integers. You rewrite the problem to add the opposite. So if you have 6 minus 7, you should write it as 6 plus a negative 7. And then you follow your rules for adding. You find out which one has the greater absolute value, and then you subtract. So the answer for this is negative 1. 7 has a greater absolute value. Negative 7, has a greater absolute value. So you would do 7 minus 6, knowing that your answer is negative, and get a negative 1. Negative 9 minus 11 is negative 9 plus negative 11 more. My signs are the same, so I can just simply add them. Knowing that the answer is negative, 9 plus 11 is 20. Negative 3 minus a negative 8. Remember, when you subtract a negative, you add the opposite. When you subtract a negative, you add the opposite. When you subtract a negative, you add the opposite. 3 plus 8, negative 3 plus a positive 8 is 5. Multiply or divide two numbers. If the signs are the same, the answer is positive. The signs are different, the answer is negative. Because remember, a positive times a positive is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. But a positive times a negative is a negative, or a negative times a negative is a negative times a positive is a negative. This should say a negative. This shouldn't say a negative. This should say a positive. Same with dividing. If you're dividing a positive divided by a positive, your answer is positive. If you're dividing a negative divided by a negative, your answer is positive. But if you divide a positive divided by a negative, your answer is negative. So what does this mean for us? It means a lot for us when we are solving two-step equations. So if we have something like number 9, right? Negative 4k plus 9 equals 32. First thing remember we need to do to solve two-step equations is we need to undo addition or subtraction by doing the inverse, the opposite. So we need to subtract 9. 32 minus 9 is 23 equals negative 4k. Then we divide by negative 4. Divide by negative 4. K is equal to a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Signs are different. It's negative. Negative 23 over 4. 4 goes into 23 5 times with 3 left over. Negative 5 3/4. Let's look at number 10. X over 2 minus 14 equals 20. X over 2 minus 14 equals 20. So we add 14, 34 equals x over 2. X over 2. So x is being divided by 2 if we look at that. X is being divided by 2. To undo division, we multiply. So we're going to multiply by 2, 8, 68 is equal to x. But let's look at something like number 16. We're going to jump down here to number 16. This will be our last one. We have x divided by 2 minus 15 equals 35. X divided by 2 minus 15 equals negative 35. So the first thing that we need to do is undo our addition and subtraction. So we need to add 15, Negative 35 plus a positive 15. Which one has a bigger absolute value? 35 has a bigger absolute value. So we're going to subtract 15 from 35, and we know that our answer is negative because the negative number has a bigger absolute value. 35 minus 15 is 0. 20 negative equals x divided by negative 2. So x is being divided by negative 2. The opposite of division is multiplication. So we're going to multiply by negative 2. Multiply by negative 2. A negative times a negative is a positive. So our answer is positive 40. Positive 40.